Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Live at 5. I am your curator, Kevin Adkisson, coming to you today from the Cranbrook Institute of Science. And today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite Eliel Saarinen projects here on the campus, and that is the Light Pylon over here. It is a collaboration designed between Cranbrook's founder, George Booth, and his architect, Eliel Saarinen. And it was completed with the building in 1938. And I don't come over here to the Institute of Science nearly enough. The Institute opened on May 5th, 1938, and the Light Pylon was always a part of the design. So the Institute, which has reopened a tour, so consider signing up for a tour online and then heading over here. The Institute began with the planetarium here, which was the first part built, and that opened in 1930. The story before, but Eliel Saarinen was actually very much against the idea of putting the Institute of Science right here. And part of his reluctance to this situation was that it was in the very middle of the campus. And Eliel Saarinen felt that the Cranbrook institutions would be better served if each of them was sort of closer to the public portion of the street. And so he wanted to move the road near Cranbrook House, and there were schemes drawn up by Saarinen in order to move the Institute of Science over to Cranbrook House. But by the mid-1930s, George Booth and the Cranbrook Foundation had resolved to build the Institute here in the middle of campus, near where the observatory had moved in 1930, and near where there was Cranbrook's short-lived zoo of different animals, where the students from the schools could come over and could study sort of trapped Michigan raccoons and possums. Nothing as exotic as lions and tigers, but they were just sort of Michigan species held in little cages around this plot of land in the middle of campus. Once the decision was made that the Institute of Science would be located here in the middle of the campus, we came to the problem of how does anyone find it? And this was a problem that really wouldn't be resolved until the 1990s, when the Woodward Access Road was built. But one of the ideas that George Booth had was to build a light tower, what's more formally known as the Light Pylon, which would guide guests to the Institute of Science, to the Institute, and then would further have the purpose, the function, the role of illuminating the parking lot. George Booth was ever the sort of pragmatic designer, and so he thought just a sort of symbolic light would be too fancy, too over the top. But if it could be a light that would both illuminate the parking lot and be symbolic, and then on special occasions he wanted a searchlight that would shine up into the night sky, that would be something that he could get behind. Now, the Light Pylon also serves the Institute well because the Institute's architecture, as seen by Eliel Saarinen, was much more sort of functionalist and modernist than the architecture for the rest of campus. Here we see Carl Millis's Sven Hedlund. And so Saarinen's design, which the Reflections Cafe is a sort of a mistake of an addition that is not original to the building. Saarinen's building was simply this big rectangle that was fully flat, and then these wonderful limestone columns that come out that have this sort of right angle to a quarter roll, and the open air patio that had potted bay trees. But most of the interest in this Saarinen building is not coming from really the architecture or the ornament. It's come the sort of yellow and golden brick, and then from the vines that grow around it. The planetarium is a 1955 edition by William Capp, You may know William Capp as the architect of Meadowbrick Hall, and he designed this little addition. But I think it's interesting that the Light Tower, and we'll talk about the building behind it, the Light Laboratory, a little bit later, but these are half a century apart. The Light Tower, which was here on opening day in 1938, is really the sort of symbolic anchor of the Institute of Science, in the same way that the Art Museum has its columned portico, and the Cranbrook School for Boys has its great tower with the former observatory, and the Kingswood School has its great chimneys. The Institute was given this icon of a light tower. And the design really was a collaboration between George Booth and Eliel Saarinen. So in 1936, in September of that year, George Booth wrote a letter, seen here in a reproduction, to his architect, my dear Mr. Saarinen. And if we look down here, we see a little sketch by George Booth of the plan of the Light Tower. Now, I made this reproduction a couple of years ago for an exhibit, and I didn't reproduce the other letter that had the outline of the tower. But in it, he describes sort of his boredom in New Hampshire, and that he can't stop thinking about the Institute and the sort of best way to go. And I love where he says, it is just a passing thought, and I may condemn it myself before this gets to you. And then he wishes Mrs. Saarinen well. She was doing a little bit ill. And then I love the sort of Episcopalianness of this line. I assumed that the whole column would be illuminated on occasion, not extravagantly, and the top would have a overlooking light around the basin reflector that itself could be adapted into a searchlight, or from a searchlight. In the end, the Light Tower never has a searchlight added on. Instead, you have these 1-foot light blocks, which Saarinen's design for the museum had already been worked out and was under construction. And we can't see them from here, but these same 12-foot square glass blocks had been used by Saarinen for the stairways. And so if you've ever used the stairs at the Institute, you know they have this amazing glow. And so Booth sort of told Saarinen, what if we use those same light glass blocks that you used at the stairway and we use them for the tower? And then he suggested that they use rings of aluminum as he had seen in catalogs to frame them. Now, I think Saarinen makes a great decision not to frame the glass blocks in aluminum from a catalog, and instead he uses this smooth limestone. And of course, there's limestone at Cranbrook School for Boys, there's limestone and Kasota stone at Kingswood, but the Institute is mostly made up of this golden Cranbrook brick, this sort of yellow mottled brick. And so I think that the most formal element of the Institute, the limestone, is made of limestone, sort of calls it out as being a thing apart, somehow more distinguished. And the way that it actually illuminates at night is that this aluminum vent louver is taken off. There's an insect screen, and then there is a little platform here made of wood, and then there is a huge 1500 watt light bulb that is suspended on chains. I'm not quite sure why it is designed to be suspended on chains, but it's suspended here, shooting up, and then it goes up 30 feet, 10 inches, and 1/4 of an inch high, and there's another light bulb at the top that shoots down. And I emailed the electrician to ask how we actually change these light bulbs. I mean, this one I get, but the one up there, I don't know whether we have to use a crane. It is hollow on the inside, so I suppose if you were very talented, you could shimmy your way up. But on the top of it, this entire construction can be removed. I don't know why there is a traffic cone up there, but the top, as well as the louvers, are made out of aluminum, which is the sort of wonder architectural material of the 20th century. It became commonly used in architecture in the 1920s after aluminum had been sort of the technology related to processing aluminum had improved and it was much, much cheaper. The most famous early use of aluminum was the Empire State Building, which when it opened in 1931, not only was its architectural ornament and elevator doors and panels made of aluminum, but the spire of the Empire State Building is aluminum. Another great aluminum project of the early aluminum age was the Dymaxion House by Buckminster Fuller that's now at the Henry Ford in Dearborn from 1933. But I think it's interesting that George Booth is the one who suggested to his architect, why don't we use aluminum on this light tower? And then Saarinen did, even though he uses it in a fairly conventional way because it's an aluminum crown sitting on a masonry and glass block structure. Now, as we look at it, I mentioned that it's about 31 feet high, and it's a little bit hard to tell today because there's so many trees, but if I turn the camera and keep the light tower in view, we can see this cut through between the trees. And when you're driving up Woodward Avenue in the winter, you actually can see the light tower from Woodward Avenue because we're on this very high point. It's the same height as the art museum. And so everything is sort of downhill from here. And the parking spaces are in this huge semicircle that was part of the plan from the first date from Saarinen's 1935 designs. And originally, this 20-foot radius circle that's around it, the parking went both directions. So you could park towards the light tower and around it. And then the illumination from the tower was the sort of parking lot light. So it served not only as an icon, but it also served this functional purpose. And if I keep walking around it, and I hope I stay connected, you can see that if you look straight down here, in a couple of weeks when more leaves have turned, you actually can see the art museum from the light tower. So Saarinen placed it at the center of this round parking lot, but also so that cars, as they came in Academy Way, they could look down this sort of serpentine road and they would see the Institute glowing at the end of the street. Now, how is this glass block tower actually staying up? There are 28-foot long steel rods that are mounted in the limestone blocks here, and then they are threaded through these corner pieces. And then there is a nut and a bolt and a steel plate at the top that is keeping it all sandwiched together there. And then every 3 feet, so every 3 blocks, there is a 1/4-inch steel bar that is going around and is bolted back in place to the vertical bars. So it is this sort of almost tensile steel structure that's bolted together and keeps the whole limestone glass block and steel bar structure rigid. So this design, I looked at the drawings in archives today, and it was actually drawn on Christmas Eve, 1936, so December 23rd, 1936. It was already in place by late 1937, and I assume that it was lit on opening day, May 5th, 1938, and it is kept lit every night these days, so it's not just special occasions, but there's also not a searchlight on the top. I think that the beauty of this sort of light tower, the Light Pylon, was complemented then in 1998 by the addition of the Light Laboratory by Stephen Hull. And Stephen Hull, who I've talked about in another Live at 5 and on the Cranbrook blog as well, he's a Washington-born New York architect who comes to Cranbrook to interview in the 1990s. He designs this building starting around 1991. Things really get heated up around 96, and it opens in 1998. And he wanted every part of the building to be not only a teaching tool related to science, but he also wanted to weave it into Cranbrook's building, or into Saarinen's building. So you see the way that he uses all of these different light panels in this steel structure that has then been acid etched to get this wonderful red color. And each of those glass panels are a different way of forming glass, so of pouring molten glass into windows. And then when you stand within the light laboratory, all of the reflected sunlight is cast, and you see sort of the science of light and glass shining in this great white cubic room. And his building, just like Saarinen's building, is a U shape. And so his U is sort of ending at the light lab. Saarinen's U is coming out with the Hall of Minerals and the Hall of Man here. And so he turned it into a donut. But I just think the similarities, the sort of, first of all, the ability of the newer architecture to still maintain the light pylon without altering the pylon at all as the sort of center, the spiritual entrance mark of the Institute, was very respectful, but also very impressive. If anything, the light pylon, when the door moved from here back to here, the light pylon became even more central to our understanding of the Institute of Science. And then it's almost like when you go into the light laboratory that you are stepping into the great light pylon. And just like the light pylon is made out of limestone, steel, and glass, even the light laboratory is made out of Kasota limestone, steel, and glass. So there are these wonderful symmetries between the two designs. And then just the way that he frames his giant C-shaped structure looking out and back towards campus, we just see the really extraordinarily sensitive and careful design and way that he framed these places. Oh, this is my favorite edition of the Cranbrook buildings. So I do have to praise it because I think it really improved the Institute of Science as a design. I mean, look at these views. This is a building now 22 years old that deserves to be re-photographed because I think it looks better today with a little bit of life in it than it did on the day it opened. And then we can just peek in here and we can see the other side of the light laboratory, the way that the light refracts in. So thanks so much for tuning in to this history of one of my favorite Saarinen elements on the campus, this 4.5 foot wide by 31 foot tall light pylon at the Institute of Science. That, like so much of Cranbrook's architecture, is a combination of two great designers and two great shapers of Cranbrook, George Booth and Eliel Saarinen. I think this is a fun one because a lot of what George Booth designed, his sort of contributions to Saarinen's buildings, are a little bit hard to figure out, where he edited Saarinen's design or where he had suggestions. In the case of the light pylon, I have drawings from George Booth that show how Saarinen really just adapted his client's wishes, refined them, added the little clover bench beneath it. I think upped the materiality somewhat from George Booth's initial suggestion, made it smaller. Booth's was a much larger light tower, and then we got something that is the sort of best of both worlds. Of course, the Institute of Science, as I mentioned at the beginning, has reopened. We can hear the enthusiasm that children bring to learning about science. It's open Wednesday to Sunday from until 5 o'clock, and so the exhibits are now going one direction. So if you come with your family, you'll move in the circle as designed by Stephen Hull, and will not backtrack, and it's socially distanced, sanitized, wear your mask, but do come back and check out the Institute of Science. And while you're here, you won't be able to park near the pylon any longer, but you can sort of allow it to greet you and welcome you onto campus. I hope that you have enjoyed today's Live at 5 and that the sticky situation with no cell service and bad internet connection wasn't too miserable. I'll be back tomorrow on the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research Facebook page with another Live at 5. and then I'll be back next Tuesday here on Instagram. If you have other places around campus that you'd like me to go and check out, or other stories that you want to hear and learn more about, shoot me an email or message me here on Instagram. I'm always looking for suggestions. And I will see you next Tuesday, but not before we say hello to one of my oldest friends, Steggy. He is a rare survivor from the dinosaur age, and he mostly hangs out here. But on one of my favorite occasions, as a senior prank, some of the high schoolers at Cranbrook School for Boys in the dead of night came and removed Steggy and walked him over so he was drinking out of the fountain in the middle of the boys' school quadrangle. He was marked the 50th anniversary of the Cranbrook Institute of Science. He's no Carl Millis, but he's a friendly giant. So I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about the Light Pylon and the Light Laboratory, and I will see you all next week.